The rusty padlock click shot with a sound that would haunt Chioma's dreams forever. 15 days. That's how long her stepmother, Adaize, had planned to leave her locked in the dusty storage room behind their compound in Enugu. The air was thick with the smell of old young kills and forgotten memories. Chioma pressed her face against the tiny window, watching her stepsisters eat the okra soup she had prepared that morning. Her stomach growled like thunder, but it was her heart that truly ached. She had no idea that these 15 days would transform her from a forgotten stepdaughter into something extraordinary. When that door finally opened, even the ancestors themselves would be shocked at what they found. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from and what time it is. Also, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and share. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. I want to know. Now, let's dive into the story. 6 months earlier, the compound in New Haven, Enugu, buzzed with celebration. Adaize's biological daughter, Ngozi, had just received admission to study medicine at the University of Lagos. The wrapper tied around Adaize's waist swayed as she danced, her gold jewelry catching the afternoon sun. Neighbors gathered, bringing gifts of rice and palm wine. Children ran between the adults, their laughter mixing with the high-life music from the old radio. But in the kitchen, 17-year-old Chioma stirred the pepper soup alone. Her calloused hand gripped the wooden spoon as tears mixed with the steam rising from the pot. She had scored higher marks than Ngozi in the same examination. Her results lay crumpled in the corner, forgotten like yesterday's newspaper. When her father had died 2 years ago, he made Adaize promise to treat both girls equally. That promise died with him. Chioma, Adaize's voice cut through the celebration like a machete through sugarcane. Bring more palm wine for the guests. Chioma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and lifted the heavy calabash. As she served the visitors, she caught fragments of their whispered conversations. One woman murmured, "That girl walks like 3 people, oh. But see how thin she's becoming." Another shook her head sadly. "The stepmother's heart is cold like harmattan wind." That night, as the compound grew quiet, Chioma sat outside her father's grave marker, a simple concrete slab behind the house. The mango tree her father had planted when she was born cast dancing shadows in the moonlight. "Papa," she whispered, "I kept my promise. I studied hard, but she acts like I don't exist." The wind rustled the leaves above, as if her father was trying to answer. She didn't know that tomorrow would begin her journey towards something that would make even the spirit take notice. The next morning arrived with the sound of Adaize sharpening her tongue along with her kitchen knife. Ngozi sat at the wooden table, painting her nails the color of ripe tomatoes, while Chioma served her breakfast of yam porridge and fried plantain. "Mother," Ngozi said, not looking up from her nails, "I don't want Chioma attending the same university as me. People will think we are sisters." The words hit Chioma like a slap, but she continued serving in silence. Adaize's eyes glittered with something darker than the morning shadows. She had been waiting for this opportunity. "Don't worry, my daughter. Chioma won't be going to university. She needs to learn her place in this house." Chioma's hand trembled as she set down the water cup. She had saved every kobo from selling vegetables in the market, dreaming of joining her classmates at university. Her admission letter was hidden in her Bible, pressed between the pages of Psalms. "But Mama Adaize," Chioma found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Papa said education would set me free. He made you promise." The slap came so fast that Chioma didn't see it coming. Her cheek burned like fire, and the taste of blood filled her mouth. "Your papa is not here," she hissed. "I decide what happens in this house now." That evening, as Chioma prepared dinner, she overheard Adaize on the phone with her sister in Lagos. "Yes, I'll send her away before university starts, maybe to your house to work as house help. The girl is getting too big for her britches." Chioma's heart pounded as she realized her stepmother was planning to destroy her future completely. She had no idea that Faith was preparing something far more challenging than working as house help, something that would test her spirit in ways she never imagined. 3 days later, disaster struck like lightning during the dry season. Mrs. Okafor, their wealthy neighbor, came rushing to their compound with tears streaming down her face. Her prized hen had died and she was convinced someone had poisoned it. The hen was no ordinary bird. It was imported from South Africa and worth more than most people earned in 6 months. Mrs. Okafor's voice shook with rage as she pointed an accusing finger. Someone in this compound killed my Henrietta. She was perfectly healthy yesterday and now she's dead behind your kitchen. Adaize's face changed like the sky before a storm. Her eyes immediately fixed on Chioma, who was washing clothes by the well. Without asking a single question, without investigating, Adaize had found her scapegoat. It was you, wasn't it? Adaize's voice grew louder with each word. You've always been jealous of everything good in this house. Now you're destroying the neighbor's property too. Chioma's wet hands shook as she tried to defend herself. Mama, I would never hurt any animal. You know this about me. But her protests fell on ears that had already decided her guilt. Ngozi emerged from the house, her university acceptance letter in her hand like a shield. Mother, we can't have thieves and poisoners in our family. What will people say when I start university? The two women exchanged a look that made Chioma's blood run cold. She realized in that moment that this was exactly what they had been waiting for, a reason to get rid of her that would seem justified to the neighbors. The trap had been set and she had walked right into it, completely innocent but perfectly framed. The family meeting was held under the breadfruit tree, but only Adaize spoke while Chioma knelt on the hard ground. The evening air was thick with tension and the smell of burning wood from neighboring compounds. Ngozi sat in her father's old chair like a queen pronouncing judgment. The irony was bitter. Chioma knelt where her father used to tell her bedtime stories about princesses who overcame wicked stepmothers. You have brought shame to this family, Adaize pronounced, her voice carrying across the compound for all the neighbors to hear. Destroying other people's property, being ungrateful after everything I have done for you? Each word was chosen carefully, building a case that would excuse what was coming next. You need time to think about your actions and learn respect. Chioma looked up, her eyes searching Adaize's face for any trace of the woman who had once called her daughter when her father was alive. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone whose heart had turned to stone. Please, Mama, I didn't do anything wrong. I know I love that hen. I used to feed her every morning. Silence! Adaize's command echoed off the compound walls. Since you want to act like an animal, you will live like one. The storage room behind the house, that's where you will stay until you learn to be grateful. Ngozi smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. 15 days, that was the sentence. 15 days locked away like a criminal, with only water and leftover garri once a day. As Chioma was led to her prison, she caught sight of the neighbors watching from their windows. Some shook their heads sadly, but none dared to interfere. Mrs. Okafor's dead hen had given Adaize the perfect excuse, and everyone knew better than to challenge his stepmother's authority over her stepdaughter. The storage room was smaller than a bathroom, with walls that seemed to close in as the hours passed. Dust particles danced in the single shaft of sunlight that squeezed through the tiny window like hope trying to survive in darkness. Chioma sat on the cold cement floor, her wrapper spread beneath her like a prayer mat. The air smelled of old palm oil, dried pepper, and abandonment. On the first day, she counted every crack in the wall, every spider web in the corners. By the third day, hunger had become her constant companion, gnawing at her stomach with teeth sharper than guilt. Adaize brought watery garri once a day, sliding it through a gap under the door like she was feeding a dog. No words were exchanged, no eye contact, just the sound of footsteps approaching and then fading away. But it was the night that tested Chioma's spirit most severely. In the darkness, memories came alive like scenes from a movie. She remembered her father teaching her to read by lamplight, his patient voice saying, "Education is the only inheritance I can leave you, my daughter." She remembered her mother who had died when she was 7, singing lullabies that made even the crickets pause to listen. By the 5th day, something began to change inside her. The hunger was still there, the loneliness still ached, but a new feeling was growing in the darkness. A fierce determination that burned brighter than the pain. She began to talk to her ancestors, asking for strength. She didn't know that outside, the whole neighborhood was beginning to whisper about the girl locked away like a common criminal. While Chioma counted days in the darkness, the compound was buzzing with gossip that spread faster than news of a market fire. Mama Emeka, who sold vegetables next to their gate, was the first to speak openly. "Something is not right about this whole story," she told anyone who would listen. "That girl wouldn't hurt a fly, but they've locked her up like she murdered someone." Papa Chidi, the compound's oldest resident, remembered when Chioma's father was alive. He sat under the udara tree every evening, telling younger neighbors how different things used to be. That man loved his daughter like she was made of gold. If he could see what is happening now, his spirit would never rest. His words carried weight because everyone respected his age and wisdom. Even Mrs. Okafor began to have doubts. She discovered her remaining hens acting strangely, refusing to eat the same feed that had killed Henrietta. When she took the feed to the veterinarian in Ogbete Market, the truth hit her like lightning. The feed was contaminated with mold from poor storage. Henrietta hadn't been poisoned by human hands. She had died from spoiled food. But Mrs. Okafor's conscience wrestled with her pride. Admitting her mistake would mean confessing that an innocent girl was suffering for nothing. Meanwhile, other neighbors began leaving small gifts near the storage room when Adaeze wasn't watching. A piece of bread here, a cup of water there. They couldn't free Chioma, but they wouldn't let her starve completely. The whispers grew louder each day, creating a pressure that even Adaeze could feel. But pride is a stubborn thing, and admitting she was wrong would mean losing face in front of the whole neighborhood. By the 10th day, Chioma had lost weight, but she had found something more valuable than food, an unbreakable spirit. Her body was weak, but her mind had never been clearer. In the silence, she heard her father's voice teaching her about resilience. In the darkness, she saw her mother's face encouraging her to hold on. The tiny room had become her cocoon, and something beautiful was forming inside. She had started talking to herself, but not in the way of someone losing their mind. Instead, she recited every lesson her father had taught her, every Bible verse her mother had made her memorize, every dream she had ever dared to dream. Her voice grew stronger each day, even as her body grew weaker. The neighbors who listened carefully could sometimes hear her singing hymns that carried through the walls like prayers seeking heaven. "I will not break," she whispered to the darkness. "I will not let them steal my future." She began to plan. University was still possible. Her admission letter was still valid. If she could survive this, she could survive anything. The girl that would emerge from this room would be different, not broken, but forged in fire like iron becoming steel. Outside, Ngozi was growing restless. University would start soon, and having a sister locked in a storage room was becoming an embarrassment. She had expected Chioma to be begging for forgiveness by now, broken and grateful for any mercy. Instead, the songs coming from the room sounded like victory anthems rather than defeat. "Mother," Ngozi said during dinner on the 11th day, "maybe we should let her out soon. People are starting to talk too much." But Adaeze's pride had grown as hard as concrete. She had announced 15 days, and 15 days it would be. She had no idea that when those 15 days ended, she would be the one begging for forgiveness. On the 13th day, everything changed with the sound of a motorcycle pulling up to their compound. The rider wore a crisp white shirt and carried an envelope that would shatter Adaize's carefully constructed lies. He was looking for Miss Chioma Okwo, and he had news that would transform everything. "I am from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka," he announced to Adaize, who had come out to meet him with suspicious eyes. "Miss Chioma has been awarded a full scholarship for academic excellence. We've been trying to reach her for weeks." The envelope in his hand contained more than acceptance. It contained a full 4-year scholarship, accommodation, and a monthly allowance for the highest scoring student in the entire state. Adaize's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then growing horror as the truth sank in. Chioma hadn't just been accepted to university, she had achieved something that even Ngoli, with all her privileges, could never dream of. The girl they had locked away like a common criminal was about to become the pride of the entire state. "Where is she?" the messenger asked. "The orientation starts in 3 days and she needs to sign these papers immediately." Adaize looked toward the storage room, suddenly realizing the magnitude of what she had done. How could she explain that the scholarship winner was locked in their storage room, being punished for a crime she didn't commit? Neighbors began to gather as news of the scholarship spread through the compound faster than wildfire. Papa Chidi smiled knowingly. He had always said the girl was special. Mama Emaka clapped her hands in joy, then immediately looked toward the storage room with tears in her eyes. The whispers that had started as gossip now became cries for justice. Mrs. Okafor chose that moment to arrive with her own devastating news. "I need to speak with Chioma," she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The veterinarian confirmed that my hen died from moldy feed, not poison. That child is innocent." The crowd that gathered outside the storage room on the 15th day was unlike anything the compound had ever seen. University officials, neighbors, church members, and even strangers who had heard about the scholarship winner, locked away by her stepmother, filled every available space. The air was thick with tension and anticipation as Adaize approached the door with trembling hands. "Open it," Papa Chidi commanded, with the authority of someone who had lived long enough to recognize justice when he saw it. "Open the door and see what 15 days of cruelty have created." Adaize fumbled with the padlock, her fingers shaking so badly that Mrs. Okafor had to help her. The metal clicked open with a sound that echoed across the silent compound. What they found inside defied every expectation. Chioma sat cross-legged in the center of the room, her back straight, her eyes clear and bright despite the weight she had lost. Her wrapper was clean, her hair neatly braided with strips of cloth she had torn from her old dress. She looked up at the crowd with the dignity of a queen receiving her subjects. But it was what surrounded her that made everyone gasp in amazement. The walls of the storage room had been transformed into a masterpiece. Using pieces of charcoal from an old stove and water from her daily ration, she had created murals that told the story of her imprisonment. Images of broken chains, soaring eagles, and rising suns covered every surface. In the center, she had written in beautiful script, "They buried us, but they didn't know we were seeds." "Good afternoon, everyone," Chioma said calmly, rising to her feet with grace that seemed impossible after 15 days of captivity. "I believe someone mentioned something about a scholarship." The university official stepped forward with tears in his eyes, extending the papers that would change her life forever. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause that could be heard 3 streets away. But in the midst of the celebration, Adaize collapsed to her knees, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had tried to destroy.
6 months later,
The University of Nigeria's most celebrated freshman stood before an audience of 1,000 people, delivering a speech that would be remembered for generations. Chioma wore a simple blue dress, her scholarship medal catching the stage lights as she spoke about resilience, forgiveness, and the power of never giving up on your dreams. 15 days in darkness taught me that the human spirit cannot be imprisoned, she told the hushed audience. When they tried to bury my dreams, they planted seeds instead. The standing ovation lasted for 10 minutes, but it was the sight of Adeze in the back row, tears streaming down her face, that moved Chioma most deeply. The compound in New Haven had become famous throughout Enugu. Visitors came daily to see the storage room that had been converted into a shrine of hope. The murals were preserved exactly as Chioma had created them, and the room now served as a study center for children from poor families. A plaque by the door read, "Where dreams were buried and hope was born." Mrs. Okafor established an educational fund in Chioma's name, and Papa Chidi lived long enough to see 3 more children from their compound receive full scholarships. The neighborhood that had once whispered about injustice now sang songs of triumph and transformation. Chioma graduated with first-class honors and returned home, not as a victim, but as a victor. She stood in front of her father's grave, now decorated with flowers from grateful neighbors, and whispered, "Papa, I kept my promise. They tried to bury me, but I grew instead." The storage room that was meant to break her spirit had become the birthplace of a legend, and somewhere in the heavens, the ancestors smiled, knowing that sometimes the darkest places produce the brightest lights. What an incredible journey from darkness to light. Chioma's story reminds us that our circumstances don't define our destiny, our response to them does. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe for more inspiring tales, and share this with someone who needs to remember that they too are unbreakable. Drop a comment below telling me what part of Chioma's journey resonated with you most. Remember, you are stronger than you know, and your dreams are worth fighting for.